Okay, well, welcome everybody. This is the first meeting of the Downtown Facilities Special Committee. It's October 10th. And in the chambers, we have Mike Lane, we've got Rich, Susan, Deborah, Greg Mezzi is on Zoom, and did I miss somebody?
Veronica's not here.
Okay, and Veronica, I guess, is on her way. And we have many other people here who are focused on this from the various departments, and appreciate you guys being here. We'll call the meeting to order. Any changes to the agenda of anybody? Or? Okay. Any comments from the public? Okay, I guess we're moving right along then. I was surprised when I was asked to be the chair. I'm honored to do that. I have experience in facilities, and it's going to be a long process with a lot of information that's going to be required from a lot of people, and I'm looking forward to putting something together that makes sense, that we can make sure we understand what our priorities are and the resources we need, and trying to move this project forward. My thought was that we would only focus on the 300 block. The 400 block is going to be somebody else's responsibility, so we'll just focus on the 300 block in this committee. That's all I have right now. So,
somebody else looks puzzled.
Mike, are you okay with the facilities committee staying on the 400 block? I don't think that really has anything to do with what we're doing here.
I have no problem with that, although I can imagine both of them are going to kind of mesh together from time to time.
Yeah, I imagine the 300 block discussion will go on. I'm just thinking that we should kind of just focus ahead and with the 300 block, and they will, I'm sure they will overlap. So, Susan, did you want to add anything?
No, thank you.
My thought was that we need to understand what resources the county currently has available to work on this project. And I did get an email from Lisa, and we did speak on the phone. She wished she could be here, but obviously she couldn't be. So we're going to leave it up to Norma to talk if she wants to.
Thank you. Yeah, so Lisa and I talked yesterday about this, and we believe that while we've, in the budget in the county administrator's recommended budget, we removed the project manager position, project manager 2 position out of the facilities division. If these are to move forward, we believe that it would be helpful, and to Aurel particularly, to make sure that we have somebody to assist him with moving these projects along with the expertise in construction. So it would be our recommendation that we at least look at adding that position back in on with multi-year funding. So that I think we're going to need that. And then of course, once we have a budget director in place, that would free my time up as well to help, with the administration of this project. So,
anybody have any questions? Or yeah, Rich.
When would the project manager be needed? Would it be at the initial planning stage? Because right now we would be doing space usage and things of that nature. Is it when we get into actually putting stuff in the dirt?
When I talked to Lisa on Sunday, no, we would not need it during the planning or even the early schematic design. Probably as we get into construction documents prior to the start of construction.
I guess my question then is, what would this person do in 2024?
Would be involved in the construction documents phase, working with our consultants and doing a lot of project management of the consultants and doing investigations.
Would that be the second half of the year?
Yes. Well, we do have a timeline, and so I think it's helpful when we refer to the timeline a little later.
I'm obviously asking because of budget.
Yeah.
Okay.
it's likely that even if we're the timeline to find somebody to fill the position is going to be, it probably won't be until the middle of the year before we get anybody hired into the position.
Mike?
I just mentioned that there may be other construction projects that may start sooner that we might need somebody like that to help with. And I would just point out, Arel is our principal engineer. We used to have a whole engineering department, and we don't have that anymore.
Any other questions? Or my thought is that the timeline's extremely important to understand, what's going to be done first, second, 10th, 11th, and that would determine when we're going to need to bring this project manager on. But we can talk about that when we get to the timeline, I think. So, any other questions for administration? Arel, you're up. What are your thoughts?
I'm Arel's assistant today. Going to do my best
Yeah,
to
there was a
get.
last-minute change. I was going to do it remotely, but I don't have the agenda before me. So what's the agenda item on this one?
We can't keep track of your hats, Norma. You keep whipping them on and off.
One of the questions, Arel, was obviously we have current buildings that we're going to be dealing with, and we're going to have to, at some point, remove them. That's part of the timeline. I think there's 4 buildings altogether. Is that correct, that would be removed?
As far as deconstructed, correct. We, as many of you may already know, if you've walked down the block just north of us, the Baker Dental building has already been deconstructed, and we're backfilling. The 2 buildings on the 300 block, the Key Bank and the professional law building, those would be deconstructed at some point prior to the start of construction of Center of Government. And then Building C would be deconstructed. The plan, hopefully, is that we would deconstruct that right after occupancy of the new Center of Government building in order to maintain ITS in Building C prior to moving into the new building. So those are 3. And then the schedule that we will get into shortly goes over what we would do with the buildings that are vacated by departments. This is one where planning and sustainability would go into Center of Government. We have departments at the old jail that would most, if not all, would vacate to go into the Center of Government, and required that we vacate district attorney's office and county clerk from the main courthouse. So there are projects that we would need to do in these 3 buildings, old courthouse, old jail, and main courthouse once we occupy the Center of Government. So there are several steps. The schedule does address kind of the sequence of some of those activities as we move forward on not only this project, but also I was asked to show a public safety building project schedule as well, which is the graphic now. The Center of Government is on the upper portion, and the public safety is on the bottom half of that.
Just going to try to zoom in a little bit.
Yeah, I can't read this.
Yeah, I'm struggling to read it as well.
No, we're going to give this a shot and see if this helps at all. We might have to scroll a little bit, but all right. Can you see it any better? We need to scroll it up a little bit more.
It's just hard to, I guess the dark blue makes it really difficult to see what I'm reading even.
Yeah.
So this timeline was developed in the past, or is this something that?
No, this is actually, I dated it on the bottom, did it on the October 4th, was updated, actually all of last week.
This year?
Yeah.
I figured it was done like in 19 or something.
No.
Sorry about that.
So that was updated, and so I go through some of the key phases of a project for the Center of Government's Space Program update, and then community review and approval. So that phase would basically update currently the program that we have. It's been over a year. It was July of last year that we presented to F&I Committee the space program update that we had worked with HALT on. That basically we met with all the departments who were being considered to occupy the Center of Government building, and we came up with what the space program, the space needs would be, presented that to the committee. Many of you may recall that, and so we have to update that things have changed over last year. There have been changes, increases, and maybe decreases in programs for each of the departments, and then actually share that with this committee and review it and get approvals, because really the determination that we need from this body is what departments will be going into the new center of government. Now, staff can make recommendations, and which is what we did last year in July. We gave some scenarios of what departments could occupy the center of government and which ones would basically occupy the remaining buildings, like this building, old jail. And we also actually considered the Human Services Annex or Office for the Aging is. So that's what that initial phase would be, 2.5 months for that. I put starting in November, but we can adjust that either beginning of the year or November, December, but figure about 2.5 months for that phase. And then the next phase would be the development request for qualifications, and then consultant selection and contract award for an architectural engineer consultant would be that next phase. And then once we select a consultant, we would then, what we were recommending is legislature and community engagement. I think there were comments at a legislature committee meeting and also F&I about getting some input from not just, the legislature, but also community members as we, look at developing a center of government project. So that's what that phase there, figure, let's see, 2 months for that. And then the next would be the schematic design phase, 5 months for that. Then our design development phase. So schematic is really, once we come up with what option, who's going into a center of government and who is not, then we would start designing the building, and it would be basically developing a floor plan. Not all the details, but an idea of the footprint, how many floors, sizes of each floor, sizes of square footage for each department would be the schematic design phase. Really, typically at that conclusion of that phase, we can develop then a very good detailed estimate for the cost of the project. And then the next phase is design development, where you get into a little more details, designing mechanical systems, all the various systems, electrical, fire protection and such. And then the construction documents phase is the last phase, and that's basically preparing the documents so that you can bid the project. So it's a lot more detail, a lot more information, and also development of specifications for the project. And then after that would be the bidding award and contracts phase, which is about 3 months. We would put it out to bid a minimum of 30 days, and then it's after that is really review and selection of contractors, and there would be at least 4 prime contractors. And one possibility, if we wanted to expedite the project and fast track it, is that we could do, and that's what I'm showing here, that first green bar, just that has the arrows left and right, that's deconstruction. So my recommendation is that we start deconstruction sooner rather than later, so that we can have a good idea of what the subsurface soil conditions are. In the city of Ithaca, it varies. You may require piles, and we have or we've seen for other projects nearby. We may not, but we really would like to do geotechnical studies prior to, well ahead of, my recommendation is before we get into construction documents, so we actually know exactly what we're dealing with as far as subsurface soil conditions. So that's why I put the arrows for the deconstruction, and you figure about a month, a little over a month per building for deconstruction versus demolition. Demolition is a lot faster. Those of you that have been kind of observing the deconstruction on the 400 block, it's taken longer because they have taken their time in taking the building down and separating the different materials that we want to either salvage, reuse, or recycle. So anyway, that's why I have the arrows going that way. My preference would be not long after the last building is vacated, which is February of next year. Sometime next year if we wanted to do the deconstruction. So we would fast track it where we could do the foundations work sooner than the schedule they're showing there to get the building moving faster. So this is not the kind of the optimal schedule. This is probably a more realistic schedule where we're showing the construction starting all at once in, let's see, here it's showing March or end of February of 2026. And it would be a 22-month construction schedule. And then after that is commissioning, basically moving in furniture, moving the departments, and occupancy, which is about 3 months, which would be occupancy would be about March of 2028. So, at first it sounds like, wow, that's a long time, but when you put all the pieces together, that's what it ends up at. And it could be slightly longer depending on reviews. I put reviews based on my experience in working with committees and legislatures. Obviously, it could go much faster, but I figure that there will be a lot of input and comment as we go through each phase of either the update or schematic design, where this committee and the legislature may want to weigh in. A very important.
Aurel, can you use your microphone a little bit? Pull it a little closer. Thank you.
So in any case, that's the schedule. If there are any questions in particular regarding this schedule, any of the phases that I've discussed?
Do you have any questions, or Deborah?
Yeah, I think one of the ongoing questions that I've had is how far down the site planning road do we need to be before we can deconstruct those two buildings? Because I'm concerned about leaving those for any length of time.
I reply? So yeah, we did have an initial conversation, administration and myself, with the land use attorneys. I don't know, were you on that call, Aurel? Yeah. To get some initial feedback. They're going to review all the documents we sent them of all the resolutions in the seeker and everything that's been done to date. But they said typically it's part of the bid package that you construct and demolition the building as part of one bid package to prevent what you're talking about. And so I don't know if there are other ways to get some of the soil testing without the buildings coming down, but I imagine the attorneys will be weighing in on the timeline and how to sequence things as well.
Okay. I just hate those buildings sitting there empty. It's just an invitation to dereliction and vandalism, and yeah.
They were made aware of that concern as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mike?
To that point, yes, the legislature has made a decision to move forward, and by doing that, they leapfrogged over the issue of whether those buildings could be used or when they should be taken down. So I think that's in this committee to decide when we move ahead, but you may as well take them down. You can't take down the legal building because of the leases in there, but you can take down the Key Bank building, which is, I imagine, is going to be tough. It's a pretty strong building on that. But as to the timeline up here, I'm really interested in the public participation on this. I want to hear what they want to say. I'm also really interested in the RFP that we're going to have and how that's going to be designed, because to me, if we're going to build a building for 100 years, it needs to be a building that makes a statement, and not just a big box office building. It is it is part of our campus now. It's directly adjacent to the wonderful historic courthouse and old jail building. It's possibly adjacent to the Boardman House. And I think we want to make sure we have enough time to allow architects and others to respond who might have some ideas about the historic nature of our campus and what kind of a building would fit with that. We looked at that a lot for the old library site. You can judge for yourself after 4 years of construction whether that was successful or not. We did spend a lot of time with that on the construction of the Human Services Building. Then that went from a big box office building to one which had a lot of different features that made it a more interesting building. So that's my thought on what we ought to do. It may cost a little bit more to have some historic or architectural features to the building, but I think we're building for not just us, but for future generations.
Yeah, and more to that point, Mike, I agree with you. I think it's unfortunate that when we first started considering downtown facilities, I don't know where it came from. Somebody slapped together a very modern vision for an L-shaped building on that corner. And I think that we need to realize that that was just like conceptual. It's not locking us into what style of building we have to build. I agree that building is going to sit right in the middle of the historic district. It's going to sit right next to the courthouse, and whatever design we pick should be consonant with that aesthetic. And if it costs a little extra, that's certainly a factor, but like you said, we're building for 100 years, so it's a long-term investment.
Any other questions?
Well,
Around, go ahead.
So I entirely agree with Mike's and Deborah's comments and support that. We don't want a building, this is public, right, that's similar to buildings that you're seeing in the area, which are very, the facades are very synthetic, very quick and easy and inexpensive to build. I mean, we're talking about masonry type building, the exterior facade brick stone, or a mixture of those. To respect, I mean, the main courthouse will be right next to the new building, as will be the Boardman House. So the part of the plan in, selecting when we put the RFQ is really letting those consultants that are to respond know that we want to respect both the historic nature of the buildings in the vicinity, and that they describe their approach to not only engage and involve, comments for the public, because I agree that I think the public as well as the legislature want that, but also I know accessibility for the public, parking are some issues that have come up as well as we've discussed to this project. So I entirely agree and support that that's what I will do to make sure that this building is constructed and it will last. I mean, the main courthouse built in 1932 is still a beautiful building. You can't build those buildings these days. It's a very expensive. So it won't be exactly like that, but we want to imitate a lot of the features of historic buildings in this area.
Yeah, Rich?
I agree with these comments.
Yeah, I also want to talk about the removal of those buildings. I think that where we can, we try to be more aggressive with our position on, as Mike stated, about removing those buildings. Maybe it takes some type of commitment from us further than what we've done, but I'd like to see that happen next year before we, going into 25 with that doesn't sound good to me. So I agree with that.
Those leases up, Randy, do we?
February.
February, okay. Thank you.
Also, based on this timeline, it doesn't look like we're going to be doing any really capital expenditures for this project in 2024. Is that what you see as well?
We're not going to be removing the buildings if there's
The
no
buildings,
deconstruction.
maybe the buildings will take down, but no construction actual projects are going to be. So I'm trying to understand the capital budget going forward for that. And I was wondering if the project manager couldn't come out of that line somehow. So if we've got money put aside for this in 2024, could the project manager fit in that line versus an employee? So I was just trying to think about that. I think that you're spot on with the timeline of the departments should be moving and what space they need, those kinds of things. I'd like to talk about that more. Personally, I'd like to physically go visit every one of those departments and look at them, because there's a lot of them. I think it's important that we decide as legislature where those departments are best suited. Some have more public exposure and more public access needs than others. And I think about that building is that our goal is to have it a place where, a large amount of public are coming to this facility. In that case, then parking is a bigger issue. So I'm just trying to understand those things. So I think that's important. You could literally be moving 15 departments. It adds up quick, right? It may be more than that. I don't know. Any other thoughts on any comments people have made, or Rich?
Just to clarify my agreement, I am also kicking around in my head still whether it's possible for adaptive reuse of the Key Bank building as part of the construction, obviously with a facade that would blend with what's new, but that seems like such a substantial structure. We don't certainly have to get into it now, but I just didn't want anybody to be surprised later if I mentioned it. But the law building, I think, really does need to go, and the sooner the better. And to your comment about getting a tour of the departments, I think that's a really good idea. But at the same time, I'm concerned that as a committee, we probably should not be in the weeds too far in trying to decide which departments go into the building or not, because we're going to get bogged down really quick. It's too complicated a decision. We're really good at binary, and the idea of 15 departments and which one goes here and there, we'll never get there. I think this is something the facilities and county administrator need to give us a clear recommendation, and then we can comment with our knowledge saying, well, what about this, what about that? But I don't think this should come from us. I don't know if that's what you were intending, but I would have concerns if we were going to try to do that.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking the whole committee, but I have a question on a few specific departments.
Yeah. No, I'd like to see them too.
Yeah,
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. Deborah?
Yeah, further to Rich's comments, I know that our members of the legislature have areas that they're really interested in, and they want to get down and dirty with it. But I think it's really important that we learn to stay in our lane. I see this tendency to overstep a lot in budget, capital, and personnel issues. And I just want to remind everybody, we have really competent, super competent staff whose judgment we pay a fair amount of money for. And this is their job. And I don't want to trample all over it. We didn't get elected to decide where DPS sits, where assessment sits. So, yeah, I think this is just, I wanted to drill down on Rich's concern. Thank you.
I'd like to just support that. I think one of the most important things we can do with any kind of construction development is to listen to the staff and what their needs are, and the administration, because I trust them to work together to decide where things go.
Rich?
Sorry, more. I brought a book. I read this recently, How Big Things Get Done. If we're spending money wildly, I would think this might be something for the committee members to get a copy of. It's very readable. It really talks about how you can screw up a big project, and politicians can really do that. There's great examples here of governments saying we need to get shovels in the ground and we need to start because of some outside date, and they ruin projects. We can add tremendous value if we do it the right way, and the book talks about that as well. But I think we need to really understand what our role is, and this might help us do that. So I would recommend a trip to the bookstore.
We're not spending money wildly.
On books, just on books.
I agree with that. Maybe the best way to do it is to kind of present some criteria that are most important to legislators. For me, one would be parking, accessibility, number of public attending, in certain departments. I'm really just thinking forward as to, how many parking spaces we need, what department should be recommended to be on the first floor, for example, because of access issues. Of course, we'll have an elevator or more. So I'm just trying to think of those things. And related to, on your timeline for RFQ development and consultant, I don't see why that process can't be moved forward. I look at that as a search that can be started at any time. And I know Ann Corman talked about this as well, is that we want to make sure we open this up to a large number of qualified consultants and architects, engineer groups. And we probably have quite a few that are doing work in the city now, some that we know. So I'm just thinking that one could be moved up. We don't have to wait for that for any reason. And the way we do the RFQ could be based on the comments that people made about the way we want it to look. And today, with the technology, people can set up a tripod, scan the area, do drones, and can do a pretty quick schematic when they present their proposals to us. So I just wanted to share that. Rob, go ahead.
The reason that I have the RFQ development after the space program update is one thing that would be very helpful before we put out an RFQ is giving a clear scope. We don't want to go out there and say we don't know, what departments are going to be the building, how large the building is going to be. So that's why we wanted to get through that initial phase to see, what we decide as far as occupants of the building, the size, square footage, give them as much scope to help the consultants as they submit their proposals for the RFQ phase. So that's why I did that. If it was clear, any other project I've done before, it's been pretty clear before we're going in. We know we're going to be a new building for just one department. We know the square footage. I can do an RFQ, and so that's why I did it that way. What I could do in the near future is actually share kind of a draft of the RFQ, knowing that we still have to fill in some key portions of that, like the scope of the size of the building. So that's why I showed it that way in the schedule here.
Mike?
A couple of times it came up in F&I about whether we ought to think about doing a competition among the respondents to the RFP, and even offer a prize of some kind, so that we could attract some different kinds of proposals to come in. And I'm not saying whether I'm in favor of that or not in favor of it, but I do think we ought to mention that here.
I just wanted to remind folks, so we had a downtown facilities plan that we presented back in June that had some parking information and such. So I'm wondering if maybe we should resend that again so folks have the opportunity to take a look at it. Because a lot of the work that we're talking about right now had been done, and or at least, yes, that one. So I'm going to send that out. It might just be helpful for folks to review that again. Can I send that to you folks? Okay, great.
Can we have paper, please? As well as electronic.
And then also comments that were made prior to that. When we were doing the space program update, last July, prior to that with departments, as we were meeting with departments, I was included in those meetings. We asked, important adjacencies, major adjacencies, which means which departments, are helpful to have right next to you or in the same building at least, and minor adjacencies, public access, for those departments, it's important. Get an idea of how much traffic they're getting on a daily basis. So we discussed all those things. We have that data available, and it's 18 departments that are actually being considered as to go into the center of government. And in the presentation that we did last July of 2022, we also showed some options of who could go where. And so I agree that we have a lot of the information where we could, as staff, make those recommendations as far as which departments make sense to go into a center of government, which ones could go and backfill in some of the other buildings that are vacated, and the reasoning why we would suggest that. And also we looked at, which departments in our meetings with each department would benefit for being on the ground floor for access to the public. So we looked at all of that and those that could be on upper floors. The department, I've got to say that every other department wanted to be in the building was ITS. Everyone wanted ITS in the center of government. And some departments didn't want another department in the building, and not because they don't get along, but just they have to be separated, like assigned counsel and district attorney's office, those things that could work, but it wasn't suggested because, the parties, opposing parties could be running into each other in the main lobby. So we have a lot of that information, and as I said, last July, we did present some options for who could occupy the center of government. So we would plan to do the same thing as we update and refresh things for this committee.
Mike?
I just wondered about that comment that they all want ITS in the same building. They're just across the parking lot now. Why, for many of them, not all of them, I understand. Why is that more important?
Well, I mean, that was half joking, but I think a lot of departments at least have software and applications like the ability to have somebody from ITS just drop right by if there's issues with their systems. Okay. So I think it was more that than
I know we talked, among other things, the possibility of putting ITS in the old jail.
Correct.
Susan?
Aurel, was all that information that you gathered last year available in a report?
Yes, we actually sent it to the legislature last July. I can work with legislature office to resend that presentation to all of you.
Yeah, I wasn't here then, so.
One of the things that came up, we talked about ITS, and of course this would affect assessment and Board of Elections. Those buildings need to be taken down in theory, right? Mm-hmm. And would those departments need to be relocated for a period of time?
Well, what I said earlier, the hope and plan is, and some of it depends on soils in that area, is that we would, because the plan is that we would create a green space and possibly access to parking from Buffalo Street between Boardman House and this new building. And so that would be green space, which means we wouldn't build on it anyway. And if we can preserve Building C until we build the center of government and then deconstruct it, then obviously those occupants would move in once the center of government is completed. If we can't, then we would have to find temporary space, or like ITS. I think ITS has said that they only want to move once, and so in which case we would have to move ITS somewhere else. And Old Jail could be possibility somewhere else permanently, but the other, like assessment and Board of Elections, would have to be put into swing space. We call it just temporary space.
Anybody else have any comments or questions? How do people feel about the timeline? Does the timeline look reasonable to people, or? If we could get a hard copy or electronic copy of that to look at, I'd appreciate it to look at that.
Okay.
Jordan and Taylor.
Yes, Mike?
Just that I think it reflects what a majority of the legislature wanted to do when they voted 12-2 to move this forward. I think they wanted to move forward ASAP.
I must indicate that timeline, we've only focused on the upper portion, which was center of government. The lower half shows the public safety building, and so that's not anything that this committee is discussing, but I did want, it was brought up, I think it was by Shauna a couple of weeks ago, or maybe it was Ann, that it would be helpful to have a timeline in looking at both of them. So when you do get the document, it's going to have public safety. We haven't spoken about it. I haven't addressed it either, but I did discuss it with Lisa and with Norma, and the timeline, at least on the bottom portion, shows how we could accomplish both projects understanding that we can't do construction at the same time. But how we would have a pause for the public safety building and then start the work after Center of Government is completed, but still starting design prior to that.
Veronica?
I just want to say the timeline's one area where, like, I don't know how construction works, so this is a variable. Stay in my lane and trust the expert. But it is really helpful to see all the pieces and understand the flow of a project. So thank you for making it.
Well, I appreciate all the work everybody's done so far to get to this point. I think quite a bit of work has been done. The space study been done twice, right? So it's good to look at that. Maybe the next meeting we have, we could look specifically at that timeline schedule, the early ones anyways. Talk about the reaching out to contractors, engineers, those kinds of things with RFQ. Maybe Mike's idea could be debated about whether or not we want to make this a competition of some sort. Any other thoughts on that, or Deborah?
Yeah, I guess one thing that would be helpful to me, I mean, I see this timeline and it's broken down into categories, but I'd like a better sense of what the schedule's going to be for spending money. Because I can look at these categories and I don't really have a very good idea of what each one's going to cost. So that might be good for us to know sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and I think if you could compare it to what our planned capital expenditures in 2024 and 25 would be, current plan versus what we're actually going to spend would be helpful as well, I think, so. Greg, you have any thoughts? Or?
No, I appreciate it. Thanks, Randy. You guys pretty much hit on it. I think Deborah hit a point that I was thinking too, right? What's our spending along the way? So nice thing about a big committee is most of the stuff's already been said.
Nice. Anybody else want to suggest anything, or Norma?
Yeah, so Aurel and I did talk about this because I asked the same question, how are we going to spend the money? And can imagine maybe why. So in the first couple, just up to abatement and deconstruction of the properties, we're looking at about $3 million out expenditures just to get to that point. The problem, or what we're waiting for, is an actual design to know exactly how much the building would cost. But just to get to that, to the construction, design, development, abatement, and space program update and such, is going to be about $3,050,000. So if that's helpful.
Does that include deconstruction? Or?
That includes deconstruction of those two buildings, yep. But what we don't know, the unknown variable, is of course the construction and the commissioning and such.
Yeah, obviously. Okay, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
So you'll put that in the timeline somehow? So I see some of those aren't going to happen till 2025 that you just mentioned. So you'll break it out, say, okay, this is 2024, this is 2025. That'd be helpful for me.
Yeah, I agree.
Greg has his hand raised.
Yes, Greg.
I just had a quick question for Aurel on that deconstruction, as we were talking about expenses, and if this was covered already, I apologize, but is there economy of scale if we take down the key and the law building at the same time? And I think understanding what the cost would be to not take down the key bank building and delay that with the law building. I mean, is there any efficiency in doing two at once?
Yes. I mean, they're right next to each other, so yes, there would be efficiencies. Just one mobilization. Those that would be interested in bidding for the work would like the opportunity to do two rather than two separate ones. I think our challenge has been, and the reason it's taken so long to do the 400 block, is just getting contractors. So I'd rather do it once and do two buildings than do it once and then have to wait and then maybe not be able to get the next one in for months. we're competing with a lot of other big projects going on in the area, and that's been part of the challenge. And so, yes, I think there would be. And also, if we work it just right, we may spend a little less because as on this building, the 400 block, we've had to deconstruct it, and now the last 3 days we've been backfilling. And we've been doing structural backfill, which means we're compacting it because no decision has been made with what the future use of that lot is. And so if we're ever going to build on it, we want structural fill. If we're going to do parking, you don't need as much structural. So knowing what we're going to do on the 300 block helps because we may not have to backfill it if we time it just right and deconstruct, and then they're starting to move with geotechnical foundation work. We don't have to backfill. We already have an open excavation where we can, move forward with some project work there. So, yes, to answer your question, there would be some economies of scale by doing two at the same time.
I think as a follow-up to that, and to Rich's comment earlier, it's important to know what the cost decision of delaying one or the other, or not doing them both at the same time, would be, so that we can have that full information. And then also, I think it might be helpful too, because I feel like in F&I, in the past several months, we've had a lot of conversation about the adaptive reuse or integrating the key bank, and I feel like there were some. I don't know if they're actual decisions. I can't remember if we formally voted on anything or where we ended on some of that discussion. But, Randy, I think it would be helpful because, some of this conversation we've had in F&I, and to rehab it, it doesn't seem like it makes entire sense on some of these items. But I just kind of wanted to throw that out there because I think the idea around adaptive reuse of that building has sort of already been hashed out a little bit, and would hate to see more time and resources spent on that because I think Arel maybe highlighted why that may be a little bit of a challenge with that space in F&I previously.
I agree. Katie, then Deborah.
I just had a follow-up for you, Arel. I was a little confused because you said we could take the buildings down and then there would be efficiencies to start immediately on foundation work and geotechnical. But your schedule was showing taking the buildings down in July of 24 and starting construction in March of 26. So I wanted to understand better how that would work.
And so, yeah, when we were showing the schedule before, I said on deconstruction, it could float. And so really right now, without having gotten into any, design work of the building, I think optimally we would want to start the deconstruction and phase it in a way that we would either not backfill with structural fill. I mean, if we have an idea of the size of the building and where the footprint's going to be, then I can say, well, yeah, this building is within the footprint. And both of them at this point, I think, are in that footprint. And then we may not have to backfill with structural backfill because we're going to dig it up anyway. So we would just backfill it quickly, enclose it to protect it. And then when we start, then we would, start with foundation work. I'd also indicated before that we could fast track it so that we could do a package of foundation work early once we've set the footprint of the building. And so that way we could start foundation work ahead of the schedule that you saw there. Those things are all at this point very difficult to forecast because we don't even have a consultant on board to discuss those possibilities. But those are just some ideas of things that could happen.
Deborah?
Yeah, back to Greg's point, I seem to recall we did talk a great deal about what we could, if we could use the bank building. And a couple of the issues that came up were that it would have to be rewired for IT, and that it would have to be, because we're a government building, it would have to be more ADA accessible, and that those two expenses and probably some other things that we would have to do added up to a pretty substantial chunk of change. Yeah, so I think we need to keep that in mind.
Mike?
Yes, Greg, we did talk about it, but we didn't really get into the Key Bank building discussion as deep as I think we should have. But that's water over the dam. And I think we should move ahead with knocking it down and deconstructing it. And I think we should move ahead with knocking down the legal building as soon as the leases are up. I think they should be done together if possible. It's going to cost us through the winter to keep up the Key Bank building, at least mothball it for the winter. But it's important that we not tread over the same ground and have the contractors come back. Also, if we know when the legal building will be available, then you can at least do preliminary contracts and get people on the schedule. There's always unforeseen circumstances with tenants, of course, but I think we could be prepared to do that.
Rich?
I'm reminded of Mo Udall, who was a congressman, once got on the floor of the Congress and said that everything on this subject has been said, but not everybody's said it. So to the point of maybe the facilities and infrastructure has covered this ground completely. Yeah, I'm prepared to be convinced outside of a meeting. I don't think we need to retread it at all. But I would like to know. So I'll have some conversation. And, you know, if that door is closed, it's closed.
There is information in that document you're going to receive.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. I believe in the F&I committee, we did have a resolution to deconstruct the brick building over here, right? I think that was the resolution we did. Did that go through the full legislature? I can't remember.
I'm not sure whether it did or whether it was a motion.
Go ahead.
But I was just going to say, Randy, I agree that we ought to have a resolution of this committee to authorize it to go forward for both buildings.
I have a question, Arel. So when we talked about the Key Bank building, I think it was over $2 million, I think, to get.
Oh, yeah, it was 4.9.
It was a lot of money.
Yeah.
So the, is that required if we used it as a temporary use,
Yes.
no matter what?
And yeah, that's what I indicated to F&I committee meeting. The code doesn't distinguish between temporary use or permanent use. It just requires how it's being used and what the code requires for improvements. And so, unfortunately, no. I mean, unless we're in an emergency, like, you know, we had to use a structure because of a flood or whatever, but this is not the case. So regardless of whether we're going to occupy it 3 months, 6 months, or 60 years, the code requires that we make those improvements.
So maybe a resolution at this next meeting of this committee to deconstruct that building should be considered. Good.
I would just urge you to make sure you hear from the land use attorney before acting on that resolution.
Okay. I mean, the resolution would be okay, but actually doing the physical taking it down would be the challenge.
I think before actions are taken, we really need the advice of the land use attorney on how to sequence things to make sure that we're complying with regulations in the best possible way.
Okay, thank you. Any else?
Would it be possible to get that advice before our next meeting so we could consider that type of resolution if we wanted to?
We'll check on it. Yeah.
Jay or Lori, do you guys have anything to add, or?
Greg had his hand up for a while. I don't know whether.
So I had just a quick question. When Mike said mothball the building, the Key Bank building, I guess, Arel, what is the absolute minimum we would have to do? And, you know, this could be for another day, but what's the absolute minimum we'd have to do to keep a building that we know we're going to knock down? I mean, is there some way that we really could just shut the water off, shut the power off, not keep any heat, and have zero expense? Unlike what we've done to the Red House, where we wanted to preserve
Right.
the building for future use.
Well, we would shut the water off, which we did at the Baker Dental building, and also the heat off. We wouldn't shut the power off because we would need that for abatement and those types of operations, and then we'd have to turn the water back on for abatement as well. We still have costs that have nothing to do with the building operation, which are, we're paying, stormwater management fees, sidewalk fees, insurance. The building is insured, so we're paying those costs, so those are unavoidable because we own the structure. But we would minimally heat the building. And so, yeah, we could, and I know it's been a while, but I did share costs to, maybe not on these, but I did for the Red House, those minimal costs. I think it was like $25,000 a year, so it was minimal what those costs would be. I will let you that we are storing some things in that building, and we're trying to tell departments.
You mean the Key Bank building?
The Key Bank, yes, the Key Bank, not the Red House, but the Key Bank building. Many of you may remember the old library used to be storage for the county, and so when we sold that building, we had to recycle, reuse, and dump a lot of things. So we are storing a few things there, but we're telling departments not to, that we have to approve whether they're going to store things because it could be a temporary storage facility at this point.
All right, great. Yeah, I just want to make sure we're not spending any more money than we have to if we know we're taking something down.
Yes.
Okay, well, we'll try to get the draft agenda out well in advance, and if anybody's any ideas what they want to see in that before our next meeting, which will be a month from today, roughly, at the same time on Tuesday. Any other comments by anybody, or can I have a motion to adjourn? All right, all in favor? Thanks. Thank you.